So, hello and welcome to the Uddering Engineers podcast. I'm Amanda, and today my co-host Agam and I will be interviewing Andrew Szeto. So, Andrew is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology. He has researched extensively into mental health and is pivotal in the campus mental health strategy. He's on the podcast today to share some insights into the impact of COVID-19 on mental health and well-being of the University of Calgary students and faculty. So thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. How are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm doing well. I do have to apologize for any noises that may come because, again, we're doing renovations and my contractor is stapling or nailing or something like that. So please ignore that. But yeah, happy to be here and doing well, and looking forward to having a chat with you two.
Thank you.
I guess just jumping right into it, something I've noticed for a while now is that the lesson really has been of self-care and building, resiliency. And our team has read quite a lot of reports, like, for example, from the collegiate mental health institutions. And we've realized that students can find some comfort in the numbers, knowing that we aren't alone when facing mental health issues or problems with motivation or focus, feelings of loneliness or isolation. And again, that's not to harp on those of us that are doing great. It's okay to be okay, but we've realized that academic distress was a very large and sustained concern. And these impacts were felt differently between students, like how international students reported higher rates of harassment, for example, or transgender men and non-binary students reported higher rates of overall negative impact. So I suppose we can begin off just on a general note. Would you be able to comment on these changes to student well-being and perhaps also the kinds of resources or services the university has provided?
Yeah, so really just to address the impact of the pandemic, and we're experiencing all these different things all across Canada and in your state. You mentioned the collegiate survey that did sample a large sample of American college and university students, but their experiences are very similar to what we're seeing here in Canada, and then even here specifically at the University of Calgary. Like you mentioned, people do mention mental health as being affected by the COVID pandemic, and as well as things like motivation, loneliness, we're seeing quite often, quite anecdotally as well, again, being isolated from our friends. Amanda, you mentioned that this is your first time on campus, right? Although you're a second year student and you haven't really connected with our campus, right? So we have been really isolated from, everybody on campus, our friends, our peers, our professors even, and we know that social connection, for example, is such an important factor in our mental health and well-being, right? So, having especially that aspect of our mental health being affected so, impactfully, that of course has a negative impact on our mental health and well-being. You mentioned other things. International students, for example, have been disproportionately affected, right? They haven't been able to work or come to Canada to study. A lot of them are in their home countries, and a lot of them actually are, for example, in different time zones, right? Having to do synchronous classes, for example, is not fair for them, right? Or not so great, because if their time zone is in such a time where they their class is going on at 2 at midnight or 2 in the in the middle of the morning, that's not great for them. That's not great for their mental health. That's not great for their studying. So you do mention academic distress, and that is one thing that we're seeing quite a bit. And in the survey that you mentioned, academic distress is one of the biggest things that we're seeing in students, right? The transition from in-person to online, that this is something that most of us haven't been used to, right? We're used to in-person courses, being in a lecture hall or being in a classroom, not the virtual classroom, right? So, making that transition does take some adjustment, and there are some bumps, right? As a university, as an institution, University of Calgary turned from an in-person institution to an online institution in a couple of days. Again, things went generally smoothly, but again, it doesn't always happen that way. But you talk about resources, so there are many resources that we developed since the pandemic to better support faculty members, professors, students in transitioning from from in-person to online. The campus mental strategy itself, we've done research on how to best support students in an online environment and better support their well-being. One of the recommendations that came out of this research is to do, if you're going to do a synchronous class, also post your lectures online, videos online, right? Record them and post them online. So then those who weren't able to access them, or international students can, in a different time zone, can access them, right? At a time that's more better for them, right? So instead of being in lecture, they should be sleeping, right? So, we're doing things like that. But in general, from the pandemic, what we've done is, for example, student wellness services has transitioned from in-person services to largely online during this pandemic. And, I don't know if we'll, it's hard to say, but I don't know if we'll ever transition fully back to in just purely in person, because we know online and in video services or in that modality has really reduced barriers for some. So maybe that's a silver lining, but we're seeing that a lot of students are accessing services because there were barriers there previously, whether it be walking into wellness services to get assistance, or that stigma that may exist for reaching for help. Doing it online, it really lessens that barriers for some. So again, all the services that were available before the pandemic are available now. So whether that be counseling or workshops or therapy groups, we've actually at Student Wellness Services have added additional services. So their single session that was piloted by them and actually now instituted, right? So it's more accessible counseling when students need it. So rather than scheduling a triage session and then having an appointment later in time to get some counseling, what they've instituted is the single session, right? Which means that students get triaged and get that one-on-one time with the counselor in the first session. Now, if they need additional counseling, for sure, they can continue on. But really, getting that counseling and that face-to-face time with the counselor right when the students need it. So we found that to be quite a service that has quite positive impact for students and quite augmented with the additional services that student wellness services do offer, right? So yeah, we've done as student wellness services, they've done a lot, and there's again all the same services available. Counselors that they're actually offered in person and through online and hybrid approach. So yeah, there's still all these services, and even with campus mental strategy, we've done a lot of our stuff was in person, but we've switched to online and kind of the webinar format, and we'll continue to do kind of a hybrid approach as we move forward as well. So and so there, I talked a lot there, but basically what I'm saying is the pandemic has affected students. We've tried to change to better address the needs of students during this pandemic, and I think it's changed how we do a lot of the things that we do before. We're doing hybrid now, right?
Great. So you did mention how the pandemic affected students and things like that. Did you see a change in the way students asked for help? Because I see that you did a lot of modifying your services, adding new things as well. Was this influenced by a change in the way students asked for help, or it was just like research in advance? What informed that change?
Well, and basically what we had to do was change our fly because, we had restrictions placed on us as an institution. You can't come, you can't offer in-person things. So we did switch to online services. But that said, like you say, Amanda, was that informed by some that so what we're doing is again continue the hybrid, because we heard from students that this is accessible, this is timely for us, and we like to do some online things as well, right? And one example of the hybrid approach was Youth Flourish. So Youth Flourish is our annual event that we have, really to celebrate mental health, well-being, increased resilience. And we generally have that in October, sometime in October. In previous years, we've had it in person. We have it an in-person fair. We have all our sessions in person. But last year we had to switch. And what happened was that, and this is kind of an indirect way of gauging the, kind of the demand for these, but we had, I think 80 different events compared to usually we have 30. So we had 80 events, and it was all, student groups stepping up and saying, we want to support our students. And, talking about demand, we had approximately 1,500 participants, whether it be students, faculty, and staff, attend Youth Flourish when we usually get, 500 or 600 or 700, right? So again, that's indirectly telling us that, this is a good way to go. So this year we're having Youth Flourish again. And we're doing, a similar approach. We are having a lot of online sessions and also some in person. We're going to try that out as well. But, having those online sessions, especially with workshops and things like that, really does reduce barriers to access. Students says, you don't have to physically walk to a place, especially given, the tight schedules, students have. And so again, I think really reducing barriers to accessing all these great services and resources that we have.
Now, Andrew, I know that you've done quite a lot of work on addressing and understanding stigma, and I guess this kind of follows the theme of what we have learned, but also sort of takes it in a different direction. But before the pandemic, personally, I used to think that the general landscaping of loss, of grief, and even of failure would be very easy to navigate, almost as if I could systematically overcome these problems. And I would like to pass off some of the blame to my education, because I think we're surrounded with this culture of problem solving and taking responsibility that sort of leaves us feeling overwhelmingly inept at times. Like, being not okay is unproductive, or I guess not understanding that grief is something that comes and goes as a wave. And so perhaps, some of us might have felt this stronger than others, but I think the pandemic really came at a time when I was just beginning to feel as if I had taken control over my adolescence, right? But then some of the questions I was forced to consider, on the other hand, were totally unexpected. Like how do you, for example, honor someone's life? How do you grieve from across a screen? And it just seems so meaningless to attend lectures during such an ambiguous and uncertain time. I think this was something that I heard a lot with my friends. And so the pandemic really challenged my understanding of loss, of isolation, and of failure. And I realized that there are some concerns in life that I really can't innovate myself out of, right? Like for engineers, for example, like I can't graph my happiness or my sadness as two signals and then find their convolution, or I can't stuff all of my problems in a matrix and figure out the eigenvectors, for example. And so today I really want us to consider whether the tools that we are picking up, or the skills that we are told are important, or even just the general steps of problem solving that we're taught, whether they can help us deal with the uncertainty that comes with being human and our fundamental lack of control. Because I believe that a great deal of mental health stigma comes from this pressure to always solve our problems as fast as we can and not live with the ambiguity. And so, this is something that I kind of want to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for sharing your experiences and your thoughts. It's a big question that you asked. There's lots there to unpack, but what I think you're hinting at is kind of academic culture, kind of so you're in engineering. Both of you are in engineering. So does engineering prepare you for life? In some respects, I think it does, right? It prepares you to look at the vectors and I don't know, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know the engineers speak, right? So it gives you the kind of the tools and skills to really solve those content relevant, situations and problems, right? If you're working for some kind of organization or company, right? The things that you learn in school, in your program, engineering program, allows you to solve those problems. But do they help you in other respects? And I would argue at this moment, I think we could do better, right? I think as a institution, we should for sure, we're a university, we're a higher education, we should really focus on those content areas that you're going in your program. Yeah, for sure, you should focus on engineering. You should be achieving academic success. But I think post-secondaries, universities, colleges are more than that, right? I think we should really think about expanding how we conceptualize post-secondaries, right? To strictly places where you think about academics and the content that you need for whatever profession that you're going into, to really giving students skills to navigate the world, right? How do we navigate resources? How do we access resources? How do we deal with big questions like grief and loss, right? And like you say, I think you're very poignant, and you say that during the pandemic, these things really came to light, and really we had to confront these things, right? So I think as institutions, post-secondary institutions, we need to do more to better support students' well-being in general, and to better, give them the skills to navigate the world, to again understand those resources, understand how to navigate, workplace situations beyond those content things, right? Beyond engineering, right? How do we navigate the workplace in terms of, how do I communicate with my coworkers? How do I better respect them? How do I support a coworker or a colleague when they need help, right? I think those are very important things that we should be learning in post-secondary. And I know, for example, in engineering, in your first year courses, you've incorporated well-being content in there, right? And I know there's a concerted effort to develop a certificate, on community well-being and leadership, or I forget exactly what it's called, but to give students that extra additional skills to better help them navigate the world, right? Whether it be at the workplace or in the community. So I think as institutions, post-secondary institutions or institutions of higher education, we should be rounding our students out, right, with all those skills, right, beyond that content specific, in your case, the engineering content, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I really understood like the kind of mindset that I get stuck in when I was trying to find a bug in my code, because there's a very like linear way of approaching that, right? You check, well, okay, is my input coming in properly, or am I, doing the first stages well? And then, you approach the problems like that. But then with the bigger things in life, like grief, for example, I know we've popularized this linear stage of like, go from one to the other. But I'm starting to realize now that things like these problems don't really leave, and we've got to learn how to live in the ambiguous as problem solvers.
Yeah, and you make a good point about grief, and grief isn't linear. We experience it in different ways, depending on our context or background. And there's multiple ways of experiencing grief. There's no one right way. I think we sometimes have the misperception that there's these stages, but we know that it's it doesn't work like that, right? So I think that's a very good example.
So Andrew, it's really interesting you mentioned the modules in your first year that you take. As a first year myself, I just finished my first year. As part of some of my courses, I had to take engineering attribute modules, which focused on various topics from time management, diversity, and even academic burnout. Personally, I use that as like a journal. Like I just go and rant. So we watch videos, and then they gave us this forum to just talk about our experience. So you mentioned that was like one of the ways the university is trying to open us up to the real world. Do you think this has helped us in any way? Do you think this program has achieved what it was supposed to achieve? But more so, why did the university decide to begin integrating wellness support through like first year engineering courses?
Well, so the first question I'm gonna throw back at you. So what do you think about, and what do your peers and colleagues think about, that type? I've heard a little bit about the research because there is research being done on this, within your faculty, and what it suggests is that that students do find it useful, and it is helpful. So beyond that, I don't know specifically, but I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are. Sorry, I'm going to throw this back at you. But,
so I did most of the courses that involved the attribute days in my first semester, and I was back home, so I was dealing with the time difference and dealing with feeling left out of most projects, like feeling like I did not exactly belong, although I was also a student, I had my UCID and everything. I was not a student of this university because I felt so far away. So just going in for those sessions and like listening to like them, and then going off and having like a reflection and just the opportunity to just rant, really, I took it as like a room to rant and just talk about. And it was so interesting because your first attribute, they ask you, why did you come into engineering? And then the last one, they ask you, do you think engineering was what you thought of at first? So it gives you a good room to like just express yourself, right? So I think in that sense, yes, it is. But picking up on like skills and things like that, going back to you, from your perspective, do you think it does a good job of like training or preparing us for the real world?
Well, so this relates to the second question. Why are we doing this type of integration of mental health and well-being within curriculum? Because first of all, I think again, embedding mental health and well-being within curriculum, within our programming, again, really highlights the need, it really highlights where we have to go with, again, creating this space where it's, beyond academics, right? We need to learn about all these other things. But also in the research that we're doing, what it's telling us is that students really appreciate things like if a professor offers the time to chat about resources or to be supportive of mental health, right? It provides new opportunities to understand what exists on campus. It creates openness and discussion about mental health resources. By embedding it within curriculum, for example, helps destigmatize, mental illnesses. It really promotes seeking help, for example. So, and giving students skills, right? If we talk about skills like coping skills or strategies, it prepares the students for, again, general life within university and beyond that, right? So really integrating all those things has multiple impacts. And, I would say that, it'd be very not good of us if we didn't incorporate this stuff into our curriculum, right? The more we embed it, the more usual it makes, the more everyday it makes, and that's kind of what we want, is to embed these things so that it's without a second thought that of course we're going to talk about mental health in our course, even though it's an engineering course, of course, right? We don't expect our professors to be counselors, but we want them to be supportive, right? We want them to understand what resources, and we want students to understand resources to support each other and to have the skills to navigate university, right? So again, I think all those things really contribute to incorporating all these things within curriculum and programs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess we've already started to move towards this direction, but a lot of good also came out of the pandemic, like how you mentioned providing therapy has changed, or how the university worked to organize events like You Flourish, how online delivery of classes help people, or I would say that we began intentionally recognizing that there are like ability privileges. And so in this episode, I really want to ask you how you think we should move forwards using what we have learned, and perhaps more so in terms of how we should go on to challenge the inequities people face in their learning.
Well, I think you raised a very important point, especially about equity. During the pandemic, we've really highlighted the inequities that exist, in whether it be accessing services or even in teaching and learning, right? Again, one example is international students, right? Because they were off out in wherever they're from, they couldn't attend classes, and again, whether I keep going back to the time zone example because it's a very practical or very tangible, right? That inequity exists, right? How can a student be attending class at 2 a.m. in the morning, right, when they should be sleeping, right? So I think we've learned a lot from the pandemic. And another thing that actually came out of the pandemic is the focus on mental health. So I think that's another silver lining in mental health, or the focus on mental health. People are really starting to talk about mental health even more than before. And I know we talked about it quite a bit before, but the pandemic really highlighted the need to address our mental health and social connection and community and all those things. So I think moving forward, we really need to better focus on those things, because it was highlighted so much. But I think one of the things that one learning we're going to take is, again, how do we address those inequities that exist for whether it be services or resources or to teaching and learning. And I think one way to better address that is to listen to our students, and understand, where are the things that we can do better. And we continue to do that consultation, and we can do more of it. But we've heard from students that, for example, we like peer support, and we like peer support that is specific and geared towards us. We want peers who are, for lack of a better word, kind of a faculty or program specific, right? So we're going to do more training with specific faculties, and whether it be a grad student group or students within engineering, or I know social work has started a peer support group of their own, right? And so what we're doing is creating a community of practice of peer supporters, right? So that every faculty can come together to learn, but yet go back to their faculties and better support each other, right? So these are some things that we're hearing, and that again, we want to hear more from students, but we're taking that and trying to, again, better our services and resources, and the peer support is one example of that.
So in your answer, you mentioned the word support a whole lot. And in your suggestions, it doesn't seem like just an individual thing, but like a community-based approach to tackling like the inequality and mental health and stigma in its entirety, right? So how do we intentionally build a supportive and resilient community within our university and within our city in general?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I don't think I have a super good answer for that. We really focus when we talk about self-care, itself, right? The onus is put on the individual, right? Coping strategies, and part of it is at the individual level, right? We do want to give skills to students, faculty, and staff. We want to arm them with understanding of resources and knowledge, but yet we also have, this is a community effort, right? And when I talk about community, it is supporting each other. We also want to have the infrastructure, the tools and resources in place, so whether that be programming or supports in place to support each other. But also I think we have to really create a culture of caring. And I think we have that with, at least we're working quite a bit on that with our strategy, right? The campus mental strategy, the national standard of Canada for mental health and wellbeing for post-secondary students came out in October of last year. So we're starting to implement that, right? So these are taking really holistic approaches to really addressing mental health on our campus. So I think you're very right that we have to take a community approach. We've been focusing on the individual level quite a bit, but we need to do it at the faculty level, at the program level, at the resource and service level, and really at the broader university level, right? Changing the culture, creating physical spaces to better support our students as well, right? Whether that be creating spaces for Indigenous students, or even putting picnic tables out so that people can come outside and eat their lunch, or gather outside to have a study group, for example, right? So I think it takes that holistic approach, and everybody has to be a part of it.
So interesting how you mentioned this focus on the individual, because I know we touched upon it a bit before, and how like academic culture is so focused on like how much one person can produce. But I think as we finish our episode off, we'd like to transition more towards some call to actions. And you mentioned self-care, and I've realized that over the past few years, I think that it has been a lesson that I've had to learn over and over again in my life, right? It bears repeating. And honestly, it has echoed pretty loudly during the pandemic. And so I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on how we can practice and build resilience on an individual level instead.
Yeah, and first of all, I like to just really point to all the great resources that we have at Student Wellness Services. So whether that be programs or workshops, I know I am fortunate to be part of a program, developing, evaluating, and really spreading a program called the Inquiring Mind. And this program really focuses on reducing stigma and improving mental health and well-being, but really giving students some skills, whether that be skills with so goal setting, visualization, or diaphragmatic breathing. So just a group of skills that students can use to help in their everyday situations, whether they be at home or at work, and then especially during at school, right, when they're at university studying. So there are those resources out there. So what I really want students to, and maybe this is a call to action, is to really understand all the resources that exist, again, whether it be workshops, whether that be webinars, but also the other resources that exist, such as Student Wellness Services, all the services that they offer. I think it's important for students to know, even though, especially during this time, I know there's a lot of distractions. It's a really exciting time of year, but really to understand the resources that exist, because, by the time that you need resources, it's often too late and really onerous to look for resources. But if you have an understanding of the resources that exist out there, then you're better able to access it. So that's part of resiliency and self-care, is to understand the resources, but attend some of the programming, and really be involved and connected with your community. So that's another thing, right? When we talk about mental health and well-being, if we want to take a strict definition of mental health, it is emotional well-being, psychological well-being, and social well-being. So those are three really important components that really impact or really can constitute our mental health. So psychological well-being really means having meaning in life, doing things that you're really interested in, right? So whether that be in your school life, or doing something that's meaningful, whether that be volunteering or working with your faith group or whatever, right? Doing something like that. Emotional well-being, being happy, is part of mental health, right? Being happy, doing things that you like. And then social well-being, so connecting with your friends, family. Those are really, really important things. So even, looking at the definition of mental health, so when I say self-care, I think people should also really think about, again, emotional, psychological, and social well-being, and really to fulfill those. So if we really fulfill those, then I think will really impact positively our mental health, and helping somebody who might be experiencing mental health concerns or mental illnesses, but don't be, right? Reaching out, helping support, being there for them, understanding the resources yourself, right? So you can guide and refer to resources. I think those are really important things, and some of the resources that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, and I think it sums it up very well. The discussion that we had today was very valuable, just hearing someone from like the administration side acknowledge that things have been troublesome, but seeing feedback being implemented is very powerful, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future. So thank you so much, Andrew. I think it was a great pleasure having you here on our podcast, and I'm just so thankful to have had the opportunity to speak with you today.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure being here, and thank you for inviting me. And if anybody has questions or wanted to chat with me about anything, feel free to contact me. My email is up on somewhere on the website, right? And search me, I'm there.
Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you.